Hi everyone. We're covering the material in the Bearing book, chapter 10 of Acts. In this portion they do 23b to the end of the chapter, which is just too much to try and do in one video. So we're going to read 23b to 35 from the New World Translation, the Silver Sword Edition, and see what we glean from it just in reading the whole text. The next day he got up, that being Peter, and went off with them. And some of the brothers from Joppa went with him. The following day he entered into Caesarea. Cornelius, of course, was expecting them, and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter entered, Cornelius met him, fell down at his feet, and did obeisance to him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Rise, I too am just a man." As he conversed with him, he went in and found many people assembled. And he said to them, "You well know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or approach a man of another race, and yet God has shown me that I should call no man defiled or unclean. So I came, really without objection, when I was sent for. Therefore I ask you, why you sent for me?" Then Cornelius said, 4 days ago, counting from this hour, I was praying in my house at the 9th hour. Just then a man in bright clothing stood in front of me and said, "Cornelius, your prayers have been favorably heard, and your gifts of mercy have been remembered before God. Therefore send to Joppa and call for Simon, who is called Peter. This man is a guest in the house of Simon, a tanner by the sea. I then sent for you at once, and you were kind enough to come here. So now we are all present before God to hear all the things you have been commanded by Jehovah to say." At this Peter began to speak, and he said, "Now I truly understand that God is not partial, but in every nation the man who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." So, just from the reading itself, these were the things that I noticed. The very beginning, Cornelius bows down to Peter. And in the translation of the Watchtower, it uses the word obeisance. In the literal is bowed down. So I remember when I was a witness, they always made a distinction between worship and obeisance. And obeisance was always described as being showing respect, because they didn't want you to think that someone was worshiping a person. So they've used obeisance here, but then Peter tells him that he's just a man, get up. So this distinction doesn't seem to work here. Why does Peter say don't do this if he just thinks he's showing him respect? And in contrast, when Jesus, people bow down to him, he doesn't stop them. Why is that? That's something for us to think about as Jehovah's Witnesses. The next portion, I'll tell you, I've been out of the Watchtower many years, so it was in the late 1980s that David and I stopped going to the meetings and being Jehovah's Witnesses. And this verse in 28 just didn't sound right to me when I was reading it. At least it didn't sound familiar to me. It says, it uses this phrase when he says, "You well know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or approach a man of another race." Well, that just struck me as different. I hadn't remembered that from reading scripture, race being used, that word. So I just checked some translations before doing this video, and I'll just let you hear the results. The King James Version, the Revised Standard Version, and the Phillips translate it "of another nation." The today's English Version, the Living Bible, and the NIV translate it "a Gentile." And the Jerusalem Bible and the New English are more like the Watchtower's translation, "a man of another race" or "a people of another race." The reason I think that the Watchtower translates it this way, and in their literature frequently do this, is I think to kind of distract you from the Gentile and Jewish comparisons that are made throughout Scripture. I think they want to bring this down to being a prejudice issue instead of an issue about religious practice, Jewish practice. But he does say in verse 28, "You well know how unlawful it is." So he's making the point that this is a religious sensitivity on his part, why he did not want to approach people of the nations. But I think the Watchtower tries to play that down and turn it into a prejudice issue. But it was something that Israelites were told to do, to not make connections with the Gentiles. Okay. Now we come to the part where Cornelius speaks, and here you read throughout, he talks about God, and he just says God. And at the very end, the Watchtower translates 33. "So now we are all present before God to hear all the things you have been commanded by Jehovah to say." Of course, even in the Kingdom Interlinear, the word Jehovah is not there. It's Lord, although in the Greek it's Lord. In the translation, in the Interlinear, it also puts Jehovah, but the word Jehovah is not there in the Greek. So really, the question I would have, Peter has just mentioned one of the sensitivities of Jewish people. This is even a more sensitive issue, the using of the divine name. So are we to gather that Cornelius, having been graciously having Jewish guest, would go out of his way to offend them by using the divine name, which would certainly be something that would upset Jews? So I think it's a little amazing to put that in there. You have it the way we speak as modern-day Jehovah's Witnesses, not what would have been spoken at the time in this situation. He would not have carelessly put out the divine name in a conversation with Jewish believers, with Jewish guests. So now let's just look at what the Watchtower publication, the Bearing one, makes of these verses. I just wanted to read you a portion of paragraph 11 under Peter commanded them to be baptized. He says, "Upon arriving, Peter did something once unthinkable to him. he entered the house of an uncircumcised Gentile. Peter explained, "You well know how unlawful it is for a Jew to join himself or to approach a man of another race, and yet God has shown me I should call no man defiled or unclean." By now, Peter had come to discern the vision he had received was intended to teach a lesson that was not limited to types of food one should eat. He should call no man, not even a Gentile, defiled. And then in paragraph 12, he says, a receptive audience awaited Peter. We are all present before God to hear all the things you have been commanded by Jehovah to say, explained Cornelius. Imagine how you would feel if you heard such words from an interested person. Peter began with this powerful statement. For a certainty, I perceive that God is not partial, but in every nation, the man that fears him and works righteousness is acceptable to him. Peter had learned that God's view of people is not determined by race, nationality, or any other external factors. Peter proceeded to bear witness about Jesus' ministry, death, and resurrection. So we already discussed the use of the name Jehovah, very unlikely with a Jewish audience for him to do that. But this part about Peter saying God is not partial, I think they've completely missed the point of why Peter is saying this. Peter, being Jewish, believed or had the idea, it seemed to have been strong with the Jewish people, that the Gentiles didn't really have anything to do with God, that they had access to God as a nation, the Jewish people, that was unique and only to them. This, he has learned, is not true, that God sees what people of the nations are doing, and if a man fears him and works righteousness, he is acceptable to him. I don't think the Watchtower has learned this yet. Do they view non-Jehovah's Witnesses as being fearful of God and working righteousness? Or do they dismiss them as not having God at all in their life? Whereas God is much bigger than your circle, your bubble. He is accessible to all people. Okay. So I think those were the things that I gleaned from this material. And we'll talk more the next time about the verses following that, verses 36 to 48. I'm going to link to 2 videos. The first one being, why did Org remove 2 crucial G words from the New World Translation? They got rid of both grace and Israel with one stroke. And that's actually from a video earlier in this series on the Bearing Book. The second one is, do Jehovah's Witnesses know that you were disfellowshipped for uttering tetragram? Yet Christ taught in synagogues. Thank you for watching.